Hey everyone, this is Pam Bam Richard presenting to you AC Radio at www.abyssalchronicles.com, where Tales is our life. This episode is for Sunday, July 15th, 2018, as I'm joined here by AC Radio co-host Dimension Slip, as we'll be talking about pretty much just Rays, Tales of the Rays worldwide, and Tales of presence throughout Japan and the West. And the reason why this was brought up is because I'm pretty sure the West is very much well aware of the closure of Tales of the Rays worldwide version when it just came out of nowhere in 2018 of this year. And it certainly did leave the franchise's status in a bit of a odd sort of state. But there's the thing is that there's like so many differences with regards to how Tales of is perceived in the West compared to Japan, and we thought we'd take this opportunity to sort of discuss Tales of the Rays worldwide and what happened. Pretty much, like, why did it suddenly get closed all of a sudden this year, a couple months ago?
hmm Um, as as I know, last year it was just released silently. Like I remember, I was just in Discord that day, and suddenly I got a message from a friend like, "Ooh, Tales of the Race is out on in English," and I'm like, "What? Really?" And yeah, the rest is kind of history. I mean, I think it's how it spread or something like that. But anyway.
Yeah, and it really came out of nowhere too. I recall it was like soft revealed during a convention in 2017, and then literally weeks after they just suddenly released it on the Play Store. And I remembered that day when everybody was just like, why did it just suddenly came out of nowhere? And then I had to like frantically post about it on Abyssal Chronicles, and it's just it literally just came out of nowhere. And um it was also surprising too, because I kind of want to like take this time to sort of like talk about the years when Tales of the Rays was localized compared to the other localized app of the time, Tales of Link. And I remember Tales of Link was the first major Tales of game where they really went with the whole common gotcha model that you see in frequently in other mobile games. And that was released way back in 2014 in Japan, and then it came out in April of 2016 for the localization. So, um, that in itself also leads further into Tales of the Rays when it came out in February of 2017 in Japan, and the time frame between the Japanese release and the localization were fairly close together, like much more closer than you would expect compared to the major releases like Mothership titles and some of the other localizations we had as well, which is very surprising if you ask me.
Yeah, I think it was just about 6 months. I guess their gap it's very small for a mobile game, especially. So their updates weren't really that much lagging behind compared to like Tales of Link, which is like 2 years behind in content. So it's like they had a lot of catching up to do, and even when it closed down, they weren't actually able to release all the content because 2 years worth of content's kind of impossible to just throw in 2 months or something like that.
Yeah, and that was kind of like a question that I have for Tales of Link, because I remembered for myself, I being the guy that has to keep up with a lot of Tales of stuff back then, I had the Tales of Link app into 2014, and I was playing through that. And I kind of just, and then that's at the same time they also released Tales of Asteria in the same year as well. So that was already like a bit of a juggling act to follow up with, because like Tales of Link, Tales of Asteria, they're both two completely different apps, and just trying to keep up with both of them is already ridiculous enough as is, like as a consumer in the West. But that in itself sort of like lends itself to the discussion of like how big Tales of, I mean, not even Tales of, just like gotcha games are handled in Japan compared to the West. Because I always hear, everybody's always juggling all the different gotcha games and all that. But in the West, when it comes to like a consumerism standpoint, you kind of like have to choose and like stick to maybe one or two apps as opposed to like juggle between five or six of them.
hmm And I gacha is just really the norm over here. Like, when you develop like a mobile game, it's almost always given that it has some sort of gacha system. Well, at least if it's like some sort of role playing ish type of game, or so I've observed. I guess it ties into how more acceptable the system is here. Like, people also would be more willing to spend on gacha games compared to those in the West. So there's also that, because it's just so much ingrained in everyone's daily life that I guess it's normal to some extent. Because I just remembered that there was some complaints before about, like, let's say the cash currency being too expensive in race, something like that in global. But when I compared the prices in global and in Japan, they were just the same. So there was that kind of perspective too.
So yeah, that leads us actually to a little bit more about talking about the content between Tales of the Rays worldwide versus Tales of the Rays in the Japanese version. And I dabbled in both a little bit, and well, I'm still currently playing more of the Japanese version now because worldwide version did close. But for the two of them, the biggest difference that is very prominent for the whole freemium premium sort of approach for like other gacha games have is how they handled the currency, the mirror gems, I believe they were called, the
Hmm.
mirror gems, the diamonds and all that. Because in the Japanese version, they had two different types of currency. They have the mirror gems and they have the diamonds. And the diamonds was pretty much your freemium currency that you have to really grind for to in order to get like a
Yeah.
very solid pull.
Yes, because it's just like four per quest, so it's like you have to clear a lot of quests just to get like a 10 pull or something like that. So yeah, in in the worldwide version, as you said, they removed diamonds and just put in mirror gems. So, and besides that, they also reordered some of the events. I don't know why they did that, but like chronologically speaking, the Abyss event with Jade and Tyr was supposed to go first, but they, I think they did Edna and Nicleo first, and then the Exilia event, like with Elise and Mila, and that's when the Abyss event came. So,
Hmm.
but as far as changes go, yeah, that's all that I remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there's also the localized script as well, which is very much accepted by a lot of folks. But I remember when I first picked it up, I first picked up the localization, and I was trying to go through the script, and I was getting the exact same vibes that I had with Tales of Link and
Oh,
Tales of Hearts R, and
yes.
like me
Oh God,
as
how could I have forgotten that the script and the localization is something I've kind of found iffy at best. But it gets the point across. I mean, it's just what they call this. I have several points to contend with it, but as far as, localization goes, I guess it's okay. Basically what you said about it feeling like hearts are, you are onto something. That's all I have to say.
yeah, and to even go like further from that, because part of the reason why I didn't really do my or complete or continue on with my playthrough of Heartstar is because the localization script really left a lot to be desired, and I understand that it's also a bit of um, a a bit of a defining point of how like Tales of is accepted in the West compared to like Japan in terms of investment, and it just feels like this new standard of localizations. Like I even have folks commenting about it for Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition, and it feels like it's just like this new localization translation that they're sort of like sticking with since Tales of Hearts R. It just seems to be like the new standard that they're sort of like pushing forward, because I recall that when I'm not huge into Vesperia, but then when people were pointing out points in the trailer, like say when they showed off Flynn's Mystic Art being like translated as Firebird's Flight or something along those lines, and it was just it had that same vibe of like the other localizations I just previously mentioned, and literally somebody just pointed out it's the exact same localization term that they used in Tales of Link, and it's just it just feels very stiff and not very we had this discussion actually before about a completely different topic altogether, but it's just, I mean, at least the localizations are consistent, but you, as like a Tales of fan who has been exposed to the games in the 2008 2006 era, and just seeing the radical changes in the approach of translation, from it being very flexible, and even like going back to the year 2000 when Tales of Destiny 2 came out, it was very flexible there with the meaning of the terminology and continuing forward with it to kind of have it open to localized eyes, compared to how it is now with games that aren't having a dubbed script. It just seems very out of place, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to describe that style, but if you are familiar with the Japanese script, you would notice something very off. Although it seems that even if people aren't familiar with Japanese script, they are noticing something off with the titles, because I remember talking to some friends, and I think maybe it could be just budget issues too. Like, I guess they can't spend too much time like figuring out the nuance of this character speech pattern, so they go with whatever feels right at the moment without doing as much research, which is kind of strange because there are times where the characters sound okay, but there are times wherein they sound kind of off. And I don't know, there were some really weird QC errors before too. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but so there was the beach event. What they call this? Yeah, the beach event with Colette and Guy.
Mm-hmm.
There was this very amusing translation error where a lot of Luke's lines got translated to barf in the script.
What?
Yes, but I think it was supposed to be Guy in the original script or something like that. But the first instance of Guy, I think, got translated to or localized into barf because it was kind of appropriate for the context, because in that scene Guy was being a little, I'm not sure if you've read that event, but he was being all I'm going to serve Colette sort of deal. So, and Luke was finding that kind of gross, so barf wasn't really out of place. But in the later lines, like there was one part which is supposed to be pretty much a copy paste of some sort of script in Abyss, but basically Luke was supposed to say Guy, but I guess maybe someone did Control F and I don't know, just accidentally replaced all instances of Guy in that particular segment into barf. So yeah, but it got corrected though because a friend reported it. But yeah, it was kind of amusing while it lasted.
And something I noticed too, like at the very beginning, that also reminds me, like when I initially installed the app and I was getting everything working for it, I was playing through the very beginning and I noticed that the localization script missed one line. So every time a character spoke, they were already like a line ahead in terms of like the actions that they were taking on screen, but the lines were still like one line before. So all of a sudden, I see Melina step forward, and all of a sudden, like on the display, Ix's line is like displayed right there, and I'm like, okay, that's very odd, and that's like another thing that also like sucked me away out of it too, because the localization script, like in terms of coding, it just felt again very rushed, which isn't like it's not really like I understand the circumstances because Tales of the Rays is a mobile app that is constantly being updated, and if there's not that many like investment in it in terms of like resources and staff power, then then mistakes like this are going to happen. And even still, like I also noticed like mistakes like this happening for like other titles as well, like the Phoenix Wright series. Every single time I'm playing through, well, when I did my playthroughs of Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice, I noticed like these small typos here or there in the localization script, and I was also thinking in the back of my mind, these typos didn't occur back in 2005 and 2008 when I played through the Phoenix Wright trilogy and Apollo Justice. And the fact that it's also a visual novel too, and it's very reliant on its script and how it also has a narrative, you kind of have to give as much attention to the script as you would to the gameplay.
Oh yes, I agree. Um, those kind of typos really do take you out of the experience because you have to pause and wonder like why was it translated or typed that way. So it's very important to catch those changes, but I guess lately there's been a trend among games where I guess they don't spend as much time with let's say QC, because especially since you can just patch the game or whatever. I mean, that's a trend lately, which is kind of both fortunate and unfortunate depending on how you look at it. I guess race and like Ace Attorney isn't an exception to that, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that, especially because those games are more narrative focused than anything else. It's as if you're finding a bug in the gameplay design. So like when games have like glitches and things like that, people generally don't give that game any fault and just like, for lack of a better term, like meme post it all over the place on Twitter. And the same thing needs to like apply for when games have narratives that are being localized. Like you got to give it that same amount of attention to detail. And like you mentioned with the whole like era of patches and all that, like it definitely benefits developers that do take the time and patience to actually construct a game that is ready for launch, like on a base in its release. But it's also seems to be like in the current era of gaming, it's more of a crutch for people to be like, oh, well, if this happens, then well, we can just like release a patch anyway. Which I can understand it being like a bit of a like this is talking from a non-game developer's perspective, so feel free to correct me in any way whatsoever. But it just feels like the approach would sort of like allow some folks to be more, for lack of a better term, like lazier in their approach, as opposed to literally giving it the same time as it would if it weren't to have a patch in the first place.
Sometimes it's not about being lazy. Sometimes it's just there's not enough budget, or like the QC, or there's not enough time because I don't know, in the game development industry, I'm not sure for other places, but so far here in Japan, it's just like there's almost always not enough time to do things. So it's like people are rushing for whatever reason, and it's like by the time, and you have these deadlines to keep, so maybe they're rushing to like chase after a deadline, but there's not enough time to put in all the features. So it's like, or what do you call this, fix everything. So they just fix the major bugs and leave the more minor bugs for later, sort of deal. Although any that should be technically accounted for already, but I guess a lot of stuff happened during the development process, which we don't really know of unless we're part of the actual development team. So there's that.
Yeah, and I mean we can only like speculate at most here. But with this discussion for Tales of the Race specifically, it's just that when you have a game that has like a lot of constant updates like this, it being a mobile game designed for that sort of structure, then it just needs to have. I don't know. I just kind of feel like it could have had a bit more investment, but that's just more so like a bigger discussion about the localization of tales of games recently in general, which I'm not going to talk about too much right now since we're focusing on race. But basically speaking, it's just if it had more of a an approach that didn't give me vibes of Tales of Hearts R's localization or just how Tales of Link's localization was handled as well in terms of the scripting, then it might have it may have not affected my immersion as much as it did when I initially booted it up. So the biggest question that comes to mind is why did Tales of the Race suddenly have to close in this year? And I've been thinking about this. I never really had a chance to discuss it because this was during the time of my hiatus, and at the same time, this also meant that I never really gave as much time to the worldwide app for Tales of the Race, like timing aside. When it comes to I've been thinking about this for a while, and I know that there are probably like a lot of discussions about this prior, but my take on it is this. Tales of Link, when it came out in 2016, it felt that an experiment was being done, like how much it would garner attention, how much activity it'll get throughout the years, and since the localization of Tales of Link in April of 2016, it definitely did because of the amount of content that was catching up to, despite the amount that was being missed, as you've mentioned previously. But the key to that is that they are aware that there is a market for it for Tales of in mobile apps, so they were in consideration of Tales of the Race localization, but then they were also aware of the feedback, how Tales of Link was behind for Tales for their updates and content and whatnot for the worldwide version compared to the Japanese version, which is understandable because of the difference in the release dates and all that. So when Tales of the Race came out, I kind of felt that they sort of took that to heart and released it in July of 2017 because of that. But the biggest factor of that is that you've already, at this point now, you've given an already niche fandom in the West. You gave them two options to choose from. You had them choose between Tales of Link or Tales of the Race, and that's where like it's very difficult to have a fandom divided, especially when it's niche. So to already have like two apps available, it kind of like you're not only like, I get that there's sort of like the approach where it's like, oh, Tales of Link is booming, but then Tales of the Race may not have come to expectations. It's because you gave the fandom like two choices to choose from. And then when Tales of Link closed, practically everybody from Tales of Link moved on to Tales of the Race. And then it just felt like it was like a little bit too late at that point. It felt like that was the impression that we were getting from the folks who decided to close Tales of the Race, is because like they felt like, oh, maybe Tales of the Race might not have had that much activity as they expected, but so they closed it immediately after, and it not only like alienates the fandom for Tales of the Race players who have like picked that up compared to Tales of Link, but it also alienates those who have transitioned from Tales of Link to Tales of the Race. And a part of me kind of feels like it was like a scenario where there were two heads, like, the analogy where there's one dragon with two heads, one head does one thing, the other head does another thing, and complete destruction occurs. It just it kind of feels like the timing of I'm here all night, but the timing of the release of the localizations felt a bit off, and I feel as though like if Tales of the Race localization had occurred right after Tales of Link's service had been completely like discontinued, then I feel like it would have been like a lot more prominent, because it allows the fandom to avert their focus from one game to another, as opposed to having two going on at the same time, because of how niche Tales of is in the West. It's just sort of like you can't really afford to allow that choice to be provided because of how small the fandom is compared to other franchises like Dragon Ball or Final Fantasy and all the other bigger like Nintendo. Geez, you could choose from Animal Crossing, Fire Emblem, or well, actually they closed Miitomo because Fire Emblem and Animal Crossing totally defeated that one. But besides the point, that aside, it's still like there's just they can afford that choice, and it's just it felt like it was a bit too early for the localization of race to occur. Is my point at the end of this.
Hmm. On top of that, though, I think it's mostly because they didn't advertise the game at all. Like, as
Yes.
we both seen, it basically just mushroomed out of nowhere after its announcement. So it's like, they didn't pour enough time letting people know that it exists. Like, as far as I know, it mostly spread through word of mouth because I'm not sure if the story was from you, but there were people who had friends who were like, um, said friends go say, "I'm playing what games are you playing right now?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm playing Tales of the Race Global," and they're like, "Oh, that exists," and that said friend also happens to be a Tales fan, so it's like if even like other Tales fans aren't aware of its existence, you're kind of doing something wrong with your advertisement campaign, sort of. So it's like, um, it could have benefit more from actual advertisements. Like, as far as I know, Tales of the Race Global had a Facebook site, but besides that, I don't know, did it have any con presence or just ads in general over there?
As far as I understand, there was one point where in Europe, they had like because like despite how Tales of is being promoted in like North America, it's still the promotion is still somewhat solid in Europe, and they had this sort of like mini campaign where they had like some of the ambassadors from 2013 to 2015 do this like quiz where they're just like quizzed on different Tales trivia, and essentially it's more so to sort of like promote the game's release. And I believe one of well Koyo 2015's ambassador was cosplaying as Asbel. Lex was there. 2014's ambassador was cosplaying as Rose, I recall, and Sheena was cosplaying as Melina, 2013's ambassador. So they were all sort of like promoting like Tales of the Rays during that time frame with that whole trivia a little bit. But after, which was good.
Hmm.
But after that, like it just didn't really pick up from there. And that story that you mentioned was the story that I brought up a while back, and it's just there's so much to Race that I like. There's so much to it that, like, being the Tales of fan that has been trying to keep myself attached to so many different mobile apps for the game. Like, oh, geez, do I even want to remember Tales of Biblioteca? I'm glad people have completely forgotten about that game. It's just, what is some kind of weird puzzle hybrid game? And I'm a puzzle gamer myself. Throw me Puyo Puyo or Dr. Mario, and I'll show you how puzzle games are meant to be played. But playing whatever that was just very like it's supposed to be some kind of like novel but a puzzle game sort of real-time actioning. Anyway, enough about that game. Like to go from games like that to Tales of Link and Tales of Asteria, which there are their fans. It's just it didn't feel like it was for me because I what attracted me to the series was its linear motion battle system. And I'll like what sort of like also prevented me like what stopped me from giving it more of a chance at first for Tales of the Race is because of the exhaustion that I had from previous mobile games. Like, oh geez, don't even get me started with the Tales of Fantasia on mobile. I mean that was quite an experience in itself. I didn't think there'd be a version of Tales of Fantasia that'd be worse than the GBA version, but I actually found one. But for like because of that exhaust that I had throughout the years, just trying to like I didn't want to give Tales of the Rays that chance, being like the Tales of fan that's gone through those apps, and I really wanted to play like a solid game with a linear motion battle system, and once I started seeing more folks in the fandom who started showing off, here's what you can do in Tales of the Rays gameplay. Here's what you can do in terms of like different combinations of your characters. Like it started to click for me, and I'm like, wow, all right. So I decided to give it another shot, and when I started playing, I'm like, all right, I'm getting it. Yeah, sure, it has the mobile structure, which that's just me not being a fan of the mobile structure in general, but I can see that the Tales of the Rays developers put a lot of love in the title for veteran fans and new fans. Like, heck, Tales like Arche's one of Arche's Mirage arts is a shout out to that old like shoot 'em up game in the PlayStation version, Groovy Arche, and it's just like it even has like the sound effects, and Arche's just like shooting like from like the old school Fantasia PSX minigames. Like, wow, that's like some great attention to detail. And like again, don't get me wrong, I'm like I had the impression, because of the jaded fan that I am, and it's just I gave it another chance, and I'm already falling in love with Tales of the Rays, and the amount of detail that that game has for veteran fans and for like new fans alike is just it's on point. And I kind of wish they had that released in the beginning, back when I was trying to get into like the Tales of Apps before I got exhausted by them. But at the end of the day, it's just if only they had pushed more of the advertising for that game, it would have like been had much more success. And it's just unfortunate that it sort of like had to be pulled during that time. I do hope that it does come back, because now there's only one choice to choose from. If it does come back, I would love to see some more of a push for its release. And I feel like it would have benefited more, especially because like they're announcing Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition. If they had waited before that was announced, that could have like gave it a lot more life as well, because you're bringing back Tales of fans who enjoyed Vesperia and be like, oh, there's a mobile app version here, let me play this. And it would have been a perfect time to have announced that localization during that time, as opposed to like prematurely releasing it just out of nowhere in July of last year.
Yeah, it's kind of sad because you could really tell, as you've said, that there's been a lot of love that's been put into this game. If you read the producer's notes, you can see that the producer really, really, really loves Tales. I don't really know how to explain it, but part of it is how he refers to the characters too. He's very familiar with like in the Japanese fandom, not only in Tales, it's pretty common for fans to attach honorifics to character names. Like let's say for Abyss, let's say Guy gets Guy Sama oftentimes because one of his famous lines, Guy Sama Kare ni Sanjo, is, well, I guess the fans ran away with it and just called him Guy Sama, like something like that. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent, but yeah, the producer's familiar with those honorifics, and when he talks about the characters, it's like he really knows about them, like what their deal was in their games, that sort of deal. And yeah, as you've said, like when you look at the Mirages, they really put some effort into putting shout outs to, like, let's say their opening sequence, like for, let's say, example for Abyss, Natalia's Mirage had her doing the same gesture she did in the opening.
Oh, I actually didn't notice that. I should have noticed that actually, but go on.
Yeah, she did have that. And what else? Like also in the upcoming Mirage for Legendia, Shirley, I think. Did you notice that?
Yes, I certainly did. And
of course,
it was like, yeah, like what you said, like everything like for the Mirages were so on point in the references. And even still, like, not even that, like, I'm glad that the developer is a huge fan of the franchise, because it really shows when you played, when I gave Rays a second chance, it really shows that developers really care about it. And I remembered when, like, even small little details, like in Tales of Eternia, there wasn't that much of a incantation quote or anything like that, and even in the Radiant Mythology games, there wasn't much incantations either, if I recall correctly. feel free to correct me for those who have actually played Radiant Mythology. But like when I had Meredy and Keel in my party, and when I heard like Meredy like call upon Gnome and call upon Undini for all the Eris that not Eris, jeez, I'm getting my things mixed up. For the Kramal arts that that she uses. It's just that's some beautiful attention to detail. It's like, that makes sense for that to be an incantation because we never got that in the Eternia initial release, and it's kind of also like a bit of a shout out to the Eternia OVA, despite people bashing it. That's still one of my guilty pleasures. Like I remember like the sequences for the Kramal arts where like Meredy and Keel would just go through the sequence and they would like channel their Kramals that they're calling upon to perform their arts. Like I feel like small attentions to detail like that just shows how much love that the developers have for Raze, and it's like for all that attention to detail, it just comes to like a very unfortunate demise for the worldwide version, which I really do hope that they give it a second chance, especially considering Definitive Edition's release.
Yeah. Lastly, also, besides the developer, also props to Miyajima Sensei for actually handling all these characters, and even outside Vision Symphonia, and being true to their characters. I think that also enhance the experience because the characters are very on point, and I think it's challenging in a different sense of the word because she's handling so many beloved characters that come from like certain points in their game, so she has to be familiar with like their deal at that whatever point they were taken from, sort of deal. So that I think is a big challenge, and you can also see that she really puts a lot of thought into it because sometimes she talks about stuff on Twitter like after the event or main story is released. She sometimes talks about things, that sort of deal. And on a more amusing note regarding the Tales of the Race Twitter, so far it's the only game Twitter I see that actually compensates its players, let's say in case they make some sort of typographical error on their Twitter. Like I think the latest was Shirley's name getting misspelled in katakana in one of their posts. So it's like they gave diamond compensation in the game for that. And before that, there was also stuff like, Van. In English, he's called Master Van, but in Japanese, he's called Ban Sensei. And the kanji for sensei is not the usual sensei kanji, but it's the kanji for Shisho. And they made a mistake in their tweet and used the kanji for sensei. And they acknowledged that mistake and also gave diamond compensation. Yeah, they do that a lot. So I think it's kind of amusing, but it also goes to show how much attention to detail they try to put into the game.
Yeah, and I mean, Raze is so far like for a mobile game, compared to all the other mobile games that I played, that are like Tales of related or even just like related to the actual franchises themselves, like Raze is kind of like up there for me to the same level of Fire Emblem Heroes, and it definitely trumped Animal Crossing because I'm not too big into Animal Crossing at the end of the day, but just all that like beautiful attention to detail for the terminology, for the arts. You can tell that they're there for the fans because they're fans as well, which in itself also brings me to like I'm gonna go on a bit of an aside here, small aside. Like it also brings me to why Sonic Mania really went so well. I had this discussion with somebody else a while back, but Sonic Mania went well because they listened to the fans. Tales of Raze is going well in Japan because they listened to the fans, and that's like the big factor that I feel like is kind of like sort of missing with the Raze localization as well, was the communication from developers to fans, because they didn't capture that and it alienated the fandom so much.
Especially since they like closed the only Tales mobile game left in the West, so it's very alienating also, and it's kind of sad because it's almost like saying we're not getting enough revenue, so we don't think it's worth keeping it up. So it's kind of sad in that sense when, more could have been done. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of like I can still see it like every single time we share like a story from the Japanese version. Shoutouts to Hachiro for keeping up with the Japanese updates for that game for AC. But essentially every single time that we share it, it's to see like everybody's reactions. It's constantly the same comments. It's like, oh, please stop sharing this. Oh, it hurts. And it's like, yeah, I understand, but we're still a Tales of fan site that has to share this information. And it's just, if only it had been handled a little bit better. I feel as though, like with the advertising, with the timing of the release, like it could have Tales of the Race could have gone a lot better in its sort of like release overall. Like the localization script at the end of the day is still passable. That's just me being nitpicky, like being like a old school Tales of fan, but it's fine
Mhm.
considering the circumstances of the game and how it's constantly updated. That's just me being nitpicky. But the major points, it being the timing of the localization and the timing of well, just more so the timing of it being at the like competing with Tales of Link as opposed to them being like separate entities. It could have released after Tales of Link's localization. It could have been, and the advertising could have been handled a lot better. And I could probably still see the worldwide version to this day.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but I guess that's that.
All right. So since I did mention this in the start of this episode, is there anything that you want to mention with regards to the whole presence of Tales in Japan versus the West?
Um, Basically, this topic just came about because after race shut down in the West, there was a lot of I just heard a lot of things like there were people worrying about Tails dying because at that point too there wasn't any news, head or hair or whatever, a new Tales of game, so they were like wondering how Tails is doing and Doomsday speakers aside. When I heard that thing, I was kind of really amused and maybe laughing internally because when I look at my Twitter feed, oh look, a new look fan art or a new, different. There's no shortage of tail stuff on my feed, and sad or unfortunate or fortunate as it may be, most people, as far as I've observed, they're not very aware of the presence Tales of has in the West. Like they tend to be surprised to hear that, oh, they're overseas fans of this game, sort of deal. Kind of reflects, I guess, how Japan can be sometimes, like a little insular sort of deal. But yeah, I guess right now too, especially with Tales of Festival having teased or said something like, "Hey, we're working on a new game," so I guess it's kind of, you can just say that Tales isn't, gonna die anytime soon. So I'm glad that it isn't.
I've written an article about this way back in November of last year regarding the silence of the franchise in a sense. And like a part of it also, yeah, we have to keep in mind that Tales of like Bandai Namco, they've gone through a lot of staff changes in recent years. In about when was it that Namco, the Tales studio was liquidized into Bandai Namco in around 2013, or not 2013. My years are aside, but it was around the time when Exilia was released. And when pushing forward with that, you can kind of tell in the terms of like how different the quality of the games are compared to how they were prior to Exilia, kind of. And at the same time, they've also lost Hideo Baba and they lost Go Shina, and there are so many adjustments adjustments in the staff. That there's a lot that the Japanese community, the Japanese sort of the company has to sort of like adjust to and whatnot. And it's sort of like, it reminds me of like the time when Tales of in the West had like a very, like, I'm just paraphrasing my column that you could read on abyssalchronicles.com if you search up my username. But basically speaking, it's just more so we survived through a silence from 2008 to 2012 when Tales of Graces came out in 2012 localized. And they promoted that very well with the website A Tale of Two Richards and so on and wow, I can't speak. So on and so forth with regards to how that game was promoted altogether. Like, they did a very good job with Grace's localization and promotion. And a big part of that also comes in mind with how Europe contributed to that, because Europe was getting Tales of games earlier, and they didn't really they missed out on some releases. Like, I think they missed out on Tales of... did they miss out on Tales of the Abyss? No, I think they got that, but they definitely missed out on Tales of Legendia. And for Dawn of the New World, they got that a year after. But then now, like, Europe is responding more fondly to Tales of, which is in the West, which is why more events are occurring there, the ambassadors and so on and so forth. So with the Tales of the Rays closure, I feel as though that was more so like a mishandled timing at the end of the day. And it's still, like you said, Tales of is still alive in Japan. Like, you still have like all the merchandise that's available, and you still have they're still constantly frequent in the shops. If I'm obviously, you know this. Who am I speaking to? I'm speaking to Slip, the person who like proxies all the merchandise from all the stores in Japan. Like, I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, but basically, it isn't as big as stuff like, you know, Square Enix titles like Final Fantasy. Oh my gosh, but it definitely has a presence. Like, if you visit like a bookstore or a secondhand shop, there's almost always a section for it. But it sometimes varies. Sometimes it's really small. Sometimes it's very big. But there's almost always, no, not almost always. There's always a section for them. So, and it's kind of refreshing too. It's also nice when you go up to the shopkeeper and you ask them, "Hey, do you have some Tales stuff over here, or you have this particular Tales item?" And they actually know what Tales is. It's kind of sadly amusing, because back where I came from, it's like, what's Tales?
Thank you.
Like, is it a fairy tale or something? Like, no. But yeah.
And that also goes to like my point as well, where I'm like trying to look for like Tales of merchandise. Well, not even just like in the West, like in Canada, like in the middle of like nowhere, more or less. Like, just trying to like find Tales merchandise, and like at a video game store, it's like, "Oh, do you guys have Tales of?" They're like, "Tales of? The heck is a Tales?" and all that. And honestly, it's just more. It just needs more advertisement. And I feel like a big factor that can come into that is the whole, like, focus on the battle system. Because that's what makes Tales of different compared to other JRPGs. Like, the big key for me was his battle system. And I remembered when I was looking back as to why I loved the series, like way back, like 2 years ago, when I had to be reminded about, well, during its anniversary, I made this like small little video about my Tales of history, and I was like thinking, why did I pick Tales of compared to other games? Like, I wasn't really big into like the whole JRPG turn-based mechanics, like outside of like Nintendo RPGs like Mario and all that, Mario and Pokemon, but what really clicked for me was its battle system, and that's why I loved Tales of Symphonia. And I never would have expected to pick up that game back when I initially got it around 2005. Dating myself here, I apologize, but it's just more so like I loved how the combat felt. It felt that you were in control of your character. That player to character feel, like on the field, you felt that you were in the battles, like engaged, as if you, like, I use this comparison, like it's like you're playing Smash Brothers in every battle, but you know, you have to still in a JRPG sort of structure. So it's just, I feel like for now, to sort of like capture that, like Tales of kind of needs to like have that big push with this gameplay system, similarly to how like the narratives are fine for the games, don't get me wrong, but for the average consumer you need to push to them what's different between this narrative, like what can this game offer compared to all the other JRPGs out there, and they really need to push the viability and variety in what you can produce in battle.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it was the common of Tales. So, and most people, like the average consumer, would tend to look at the battle system more than like the story. So, yeah, I agree with your point about trying to sell the battle system more, and especially with Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition coming out on all these consoles. I'm hoping that might, spark more interest in the series too.
Yeah, I'm hoping so too. And I mean, the trailers so far are just kind of blasé. Some people may say that they don't even like it, but they're pretty average at best. And I really hope that like there is some kind of push saying like this is the battle system, this is what you can do. And somebody who I was following posted a trailer about it too. It's Omega Evolution. Like he posted a video about like the possibilities that you could do with the battle system, and I literally commented, I wasn't really going to play Vesperia again. Well, I'm gonna play it by principle, but basically, like uh, seeing like the battle system fully explored like that, like that's what sort of like clicked for me, and I'm like, I want to see more of that. Like if Bandai Namco sort of like took that approach with the battle system, I kind of want to see what the results would be for the advertisement. And to go further, go back to the whole like Tails dying mentality again. They just need time, and that's why like the Japanese branch sort of need that because of all of the adjustments in the staff. And they said that there's a new title coming out. They don't have much about it. That's fine. Tales of the Race is still alive there. But for the West, I've encouraged this before in that column I posted as well. Try to like show that you are truly a fan, and well, I mean like not really show that you're truly a fan. Just sort of like contribute to the community, and there are ways that folks have done that. I've shared people who have held their own conventions. Heck, Azalea Con, Radiant Northwest, Maple Gel Con. They're all being like populated like very much in the West, like in North America. Like there are fans out there who are contributing back, and I've seen people who have like fan dubbed Tales of Eternia's OVA. Like there's just so many like ways to show that Tales is an investable franchise for the West. We just need to sort of like have that channel to do so, and that's where we really need to allow the fans who are willing to have that time investment to sort of show that yes, we love Tales. Show us more. Please give us more titles, and this is how we feel about it. So like the business, like there's 50-50 to it. Like it comes hand in hand. Like the company, the Tales of companies, like Bandai Namco has to sort of like develop these games, but at the same time, the fans also have to respond in kind, and like that's how businesses and franchises flourish. Just when the fans interact with the company and vice versa. Like I've seen that with Sonic Mania, Sonic the Hedgehog. Shout outs to that Twitter, like keeping up with that and whatnot. As long as there's like a strong channel between community and franchise, then that's how like the business will flourish. And we kind of we have a lot of work to do in the Tales of franchise to sort of like allow that to like prosper.
Hmm. Like I think it's a very good sign, like with Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition again coming out. It's like I've seen Bandai Namco's response, at least over on Twitter, like they are interacting with the fans about it, and I think that's pretty nice. And we just have to keep at it or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good start. I just hope that they maintain it or even increase it more. So, we all love the meme, not that one, but there has to be more than just that. And I really hope that like with Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition, it will sort of like mark a new foundation, a new beginning, and maybe it'll bring back Tales of the Race. Who knows? But at the end of the day, let's just see how the franchise will go in the West compared to how popular it still is in Japan. So with that said, do you have any closing thoughts?
Um, let's just all wait and see what comes and continue supporting the franchise whenever we can. And like, yes, definitely give Bamco some time, because game development is a very long and arduous process, and a lot of stuff crop up, and my suspicion, don't take my word for it, but I kind of suspect that the latest Tales game may have gotten stuck in some sort of development hell, which isn't very uncommon, unfortunately. So just give them time, because the fact that they actually announced that, hey, we're doing a thing, means that yes, they are doing a thing and it's coming along. So yeah, let's just all wait and look forward to whatever they have in the future. Yeah. How about you?
Well, for myself, like I pretty much like just echoed exactly what you've mentioned. Just give them time. Like use this opportunity to be vocal about how you feel about the franchise and allow that to sort of like try not to make it a bit like, I guess for lack of a better term, it has to be a tactful choice to be done in order to sort of like allow your individuality to grow with the Tales of franchise. And at the same time, I really do hope that Bandai Namco does allow that channel of communication between fandom and themselves to be open, because that way it can flourish a little bit more, so that way it can move forward. So that's pretty much like my closing point on that. I'm still am looking forward to whatever Bandai Namco has in mind for 2019 for the next Tales of Festival, or wherever else they're going to announce it, for the next Tales of games. So I'm still very much patient for that. We've gone through longer silences even in the West, so I'm not too concerned about it. Just as you said, be patient and just let's see what happens with the franchise and enjoy the definitive edition for Vesperia, Western fans. Y'all been waiting for that for very long. I'm very much aware.
Yeah.
All right. So with that said, you can follow me on Twitter at PanBamRichard, on Twitch PanBamRichard as well. I'm still doing my blind stream of Tales of Berseria. Halfway through it, kind of getting to the end of it as well. I'm really enjoying myself with that game so far. And you can follow Dimension Slip at Twitter and Tumblr at the exact same handle. And you're doing like a big Tales of sale, correct?
Oh yes. I had time. I sorted everything, and yeah, I have merchandise for practically every series except Fantasia, because someone bought me out before I did the sale. Yeah. But yeah, every other series has something. So I'd appreciate it if you check it out. And if there's something that catches your eye, just email me about it. There's more details on my Tumblr about it. So yes, thank you very much.
All right. And with that said, to those who tuned in, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, take care.
Bye.